in a way, Ukraine, the Ukraine war, it was a war of identity politics because even though the war increased world hunger, and even though the war deteriorated the lives of Ukrainians,
Yes.
and it also diminished their self-determination, not just because of Russia, but also the very parasitic NGO culture which spread throughout the country. It was always one of the most exploited countries in Europe. But what they did gain is that the whole world knows what their flag looks like.
Yeah.
To them, that's important.
I agree with that.
I mean, we think it's funny, but to them, it's very important, the
Yeah,
identity,
yeah.
because it's a country largely founded on an identity crisis. The Ukrainians often invoke a famine called the Holodomor, which was caused by Stalin or by simply the failures of the Stalinist bureaucracy at the time. It was not necessarily planned famine, but Ukrainians tend to interpret that famine as something that was deliberate against them rather than a great economic failure, and that famine killed many Ukrainians. So they based a big part of their identity on the famine, which is a strange thing to base your identity upon. So Ukraine has been in itself in an identity crisis for a very long time, and so they seized this war as an opportunity. I mean, they didn't cause the war, but they saw this as an opportunity to finally define their identity, which was something of a laughing matter in much of Europe. No one, I believe that in Western Europe, it was also common to be, racism in Europe is a bit different than racism in North America.
Sure.
There was discrimination against East European immigrants and ethnic stereotypes about people from Eastern Europe, and they're very, very denigrating and nasty and stupid and so on. And now there are mostly positive stereotypes about Ukrainians. So this was, in a way, even though Ukraine is not a politically correct culture or society, they don't have that concept at all. They have no filter whatsoever. I mean, it's a culture where it's quite normal to express oneself in very abusive and derogatory terms against anyone who's not a Ukrainian nationalist. However, it was a war of identity politics, and in that way, it fit the woke agenda of the Biden administration because it was identity over food, literally, because the food crisis caused by the Ukraine war affected the economies of many countries that have economies based on bread, including Lebanon and other countries in the Middle East that spiraled further. And but if I understand your points that you were making, you mean to tell me that it sounds like I am relativizing a little bit about these atrocities, like the magnitude of these atrocities. I might be downplaying it.
I don't think you're downplaying the magnitude of the atrocities that you're talking about. I just think that
in Israel, Palestine. I mean, in Gaza.
I just think that American people and their understanding of the U.S.'s relationship to the world.
But what about the DSA? Like, it's filled with
that's
people.
A small organization that's hemorrhaging people left and right. Tell me why I need to care about what they say.
No, I don't know. I mean,
that's an organization that, at the height during the Bernie movement, I think they were coming close to 100,000 members, and they have a fraction of that now. So before Bernie Sanders, it had a very small amount of people.
But this is someone who was very visible and iconic, and she's like the hate object of all the Republicans.
AOC.
Yeah. Because she's hot and for other reasons, but
that's a big part of it.
Yeah, but doesn't she come from this background of the DSA?
No, she was a staffer for Ted Kennedy. No,
But she calls herself Democratic.
She goes to as many DSA meetings as I do.
In Mexico.
They're via Zoom. Sorry, I don't look at her. I get what you're saying, and that's what I don't agree with necessarily, because I think that's something that I think I won't go as far as my friend Norm Finkelstein on his AOC criticisms, but I don't think that she is a principled leftist. Let's just say it that.
No, but I mean, she's not principled, but I mean, there are people who clearly, choose idiocy. They're not naturally idiotic. And I think she has at some point, chosen this because it was convenient. But
you mean to latch yourself onto the DSA?
No, I mean for her career, to secure her career. But
a great career move, right? Saying that you were part of the DSA in 2018 or whatever it was that she won was a great career move. And I think this is where I was kind of excited to talk to you, because I was like, we can have a kind of interesting conversation, not necessarily an argument, just a conversation. Because I don't think that we're mad, and I don't want to talk past each other either.
No.
I agree with you in your critique of AOC, except for the fact I don't think she's wedded to any sort of DSA idealism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even think she's that socially democratic. I think that at the time she ran, that was made strategic sense.
Yes.
And she's distanced herself from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't look at her as anything special. She's been in Congress now for what, 6 years or so, and she has this much power. She can fundraise some, but she's not getting the committees that she wants. She's just not a power broker in DC. So I don't know why people want to look at her as anything special, because who is she leading?
Well, she was a very important part of the Democratic Party's efforts, especially since they're a gerontocracy run by people of Pelosi's age. She was a very important part of their efforts to reach a certain kind of young person. And she is, despite some of the things she said that are embarrassing, she's very intelligent. She knows a lot about the history of Latin America, U.S. foreign policy. So there's an interview in Jacobin where she explains how she went on a tour to Brazil, Argentina, to Colombia. She talked about all kinds of details of all the coups that happened in Colombia.
Sure.
She sympathized with Petro. She said she met with Lula in Brazil, and Lula said whenever there's an international gathering of progressives of the Americas, we all wonder, where are the North Americans? We don't see them. They just don't show up. They don't.
Yeah.
And so there's no internationalism. And so you have to have some capacity for sincerity and some intellectual level to make these acknowledgments, despite her public persona, which has become embarrassing. But the reason why she's so popular and famous was because she was reaching an important young constituency in the US that does think like her. People who have seen a video of Noam Chomsky, or who have read something, I mean,
would you agree though, Arturo, though? Would you agree that she's a congressperson, so she won her district with like 10,000 votes. So the fact that she
the screen froze.
I'm here. Sorry.
Okay.
Are you still? Yeah, sorry. It's a blip. Hey, we're both in Latin America and we deal with Latin American Wi-Fi. And I don't think she's a Pied Piper, so to speak. I do agree with you that she was used as a tool to try to motivate young voters to a certain degree. I don't know how serious they were, because keep in mind, it's not like the, what do you call them, the gerontocracy, which I thought was funny as I was reading the piece. They don't have a lot of respect for her. Remember when Nancy Pelosi comes out, what do they call it? The green dream or some shit? These stupid mods over there think they can do some shit. And that's pretty much how she's been treating them. And that's pretty much how the establishment's been treating them. And we saw what happened. If they are a coalition, because people don't know what they want out of them. Do they want them to come out and just be resistance people and have one term? Or do they want them to try to penetrate from within and have real left politics and government? I don't think people really know what they want, because they don't know what that looks like, right? Let's maybe we should start there. Second of all, when they did try to grow their ranks, so to speak, what happened? As soon as people started pushing back on kind of the main thing we're talking about right now, Israel, Palestine, they were primaried and lost. Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush. Sure, I can't think of off the top of my head. So,
well, they lost but that coercion was artificial. I mean, these were very well-funded campaigns and with very coercive tactics. They did not lose because of a lack of popularity. And I think that they could have been a bit more oppositional during the wars preceding October 7th. And I think that the Biden administration fell into a certain pattern. Like, there was a guy in the 60s who had a theory about how Stalin became more paranoid and more stupid all the time at the top of the USSR. And it's pretty simple. It's because people were so afraid of Stalin that they kept giving him bad information. Everyone lied to him because they were terrified that he'd make them disappear or worse. And so at some point it became like a log jam, or it began to deteriorate his brain in a certain way, and became more paranoid, crazier, and less intelligent. And I think something similar happened with the Biden administration, in that they fell into this culture, this habit, where any decision they'd make regarding the war in Ukraine, their terrible foreign policy on Cuba. I mean, they waited until one day before Trump's entry to let Cuba, breathe for a day by taking it off the lists of countries supporting terrorism. Trump immediately put it back on the list. So there was no objection to that foreign policy, and for these people, at least, okay, you tell me that they are minimal, that they are pathetic, maybe they seem larger because we paid so much attention to them. But for them, what is important? Ecology, Green New Deal, and so, but you can't address the ecology without addressing the war machine. You can't be ecological when there's so much risk of a nuclear disaster in Russia. I mean, in Ukraine and in all of Europe, of course. So what I mean to say is that there was a pattern that emerged. The Biden administration got used to these young people, and not only young people. I mean, Ro Khanna is not young. They got used to this progressive component being very quietist about the wars. And that was clearly there was a bargain intended. And if you're quietist about the wars, until it became unbearable, after October 7th. But I mean, Syria, didn't really look
much different. No, you're 100% right. And I think this is, kind of, if people like Jean Bajlan and Barn and Kuba were on, they would probably second that and jump in and talk about other people that exist in this world that kind of talked about the Syrian government in positive terms as being anti-imperialist And we don't have to go down that rabbit hole, as that's not necessarily what we're talking about.
Well, it is interesting that, because it's hard to understand, right? Because during the protests over Iraq, no one was saying, "I am for Saddam Hussein." There was no merch with the picture of Saddam Hussein as Mickey Mouse or whatever. We knew that Saddam Hussein was a gangster, and his two sons, and they're all, they're very ghoulish and all, but nobody thought that in itself was a justification to destroy a country. And so somehow this logic emerged that in order to be against the invasion of Syria, you have to look the other way when it comes to the fact that the Assad regime is a regime that terrorized its own people, committed state terrorism, systematic disappearances, torture, narcotics trade. And so people, it's a very strange contradiction that emerged. Nobody felt the need to defend Saddam Hussein in order to condemn George W. Bush. And suddenly